right, John, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Okay, well, I'm John Rankin. I'm a senior director of operations for Charter Foods, and I got here by having a afternoon job at Taco Bell to pay for my skateboarding habit and technology love, and somewhere in between washing dishes and making burritos, I ended up staying with it and holding every job you could imagine in the restaurant until I was a district manager by 26, and then a market coach by 30 something, and now I'm a senior director of operations. So I'm 47, so I've been doing this since I was 17, and that's it's been a excellent journey, and I really haven't done a lot more outside of the food industry except for Taco Bell and Long John Silver's now, and dabbled in a little bit of KFC and Pizza Hut, and we have some A&W 2-in-1s, and
Oh yeah.
lucky enough to work for Charter Foods, the largest Taco Bell and Long John Silver's franchisee of the system. So that's how it started. I just needed some money to pay for my next skateboard deck, and the next thing I know, I'm managing people and learning about leadership.
Man, that's awesome. And I was like, obviously doing a bit of homework, just looking at the LinkedIn, man. You've been there for almost 12 years now, which as well is pretty like awesome. Like, I mean, I'd say you're what in the top 1% of like longest serving people who work in the business.
Yeah, and then the place I was with prior to Charter Foods Takala, I was with them for quite a long time as well. So um, I've not done a lot of moving around.
No,
Um,
awesome. And it's interesting because of all the people I've spoken to a lot of people that are kind of like, similar kind of positions to you, and they talk a lot about, you know, it's easy to come in, but it takes a lot of love to like stay. And it strikes me that you kind of fall into that category a lot.
yeah, it is easy to come in, but to stay takes a little bit more grit, and
Yeah.
you got to like what you do and the people you do it with. There's also the endless switching is taxing too. You seeing people come and go from that. I've just not been one that um, wanted to do that, but yeah, the you got to love what you do, and that's part of it. Yeah.
Totally, man. And I mean, I guess on top of that, then, like, because you're like such an expert now in space, and I mean, you've been doing that so long, you're so ingrained in it. Like, I guess, like, what would be like, if you think about it, like, from your perspective, like, what are like, and being like such like kind of like, you know, like a very senior director where you're running operations for multiple locations effectively and you're managing so many people, like what sort of like roadblocks do you see like yourself kind of run into? Are there like three main roadblocks or challenges that you kind of face in your role?
Well, it really, you know, it's probably a pretty typical answer, but the biggest roadblock is always comes back to people. It's like how you deal with people, how you build relationships with people, and and then how you manage yourself. So if you can't manage yourself, you can't manage people, and it really doesn't matter if it's one location or I happen to oversee 70 locations on a lot of different levels.
That's so many.
Uh, um, and nothing changed other than the complexity of managing yourself and then managing people like people. As long as you can treat people like people and realize that people just want to be respected, everybody's unique and different, and kind of play off of that. That's the biggest challenge. Is this? It always is. I think it is with any business where there's a human involved. Your biggest challenge is people.
Interesting.
So I
I
mean,
mean,
that's
oh, sorry, go on.
everything else is you can work through, but if you can't get through the people part and get that right, then nothing else really matters.
Totally. And I guess, when it comes to like sort of like when you say like the people, it's just like people management, like how do you think about like sort of could you so many locations, which I would imagine that there's probably like people talk about like funnels, like a top of funnel, like getting candidates in the door either for like entry level managerial positions. How do you think about is there like how do you think about like that, like spotting the right talent to come into the organization in the first place? Are you responsible for a lot of that as well, or like is it just like the staff you have and how do you groom them to be more of a success?
Yes. The answer is yes to all of that.
Yeah,
Uh, do I interview every single person? No, that would take a lot of time. But um, you know, the that whole game, and if you were asking me this pre-COVID, it would be different. But in the post-COVID world,
yeah,
it goes back again to um, how you treat people, what you're looking for, and then not it's tougher, but not settling. I mean, you hire someone just to fill a spot, um, and you really it really gets away from what you're doing, dealing with people. You start turning it into a game of numbers. You're not hiring people, you're hiring a number. So you got to stay away from that. But a lot of it's about when you're running a restaurant, it's having the right restaurant manager. If you have the right restaurant manager, you
yeah,
can take a staffing nightmare and turn it into a staffing success. Now, COVID changed that a little bit. It's good to partner with somebody, a vendor that can help filter in more applicants from multiple job boards, but still, my experience with using those services is uh, once you get them in there, if you're not, if something goes wrong with the interview, it doesn't really matter. So then you've got to be able to figure out how to network with different people and give them a chance to show you what they can offer, but then not be afraid to let someone know real quick, hey, I appreciate your time. This isn't going to work because you hired the wrong person. It's going to be wrong for
yeah.
them, wrong for you. And that's really how I see it. I don't think that's changed. And I don't think it's really, what's interesting is it's not unique to the restaurant industry. I was at the post office talking to somebody and talking about staffing challenges. Well, I'm sure
Yeah.
somewhere in that staffing challenge, there's a social security number attached to that that makes it difficult. But the need for third party services is very real. I don't want to minimize that. You need to find a partner. It's going to help you. I've moved through several different ones
Yeah,
from
yeah.
pandemic to now, and I don't think that's going away. But it still comes back to that restaurant manager.
Totally. It's actually quite interesting, because that seems to be the absolute crux for a very, like, I like to use the phrase true for some, relevant for all. Whether you're like a hotel, whether you're a restaurant, whether you're fine dining, whether you're a resort, the key person across the board is that sort of like GM that you can kind of get in.
Mhm.
And it seems to me like they're like the motivator, they're the employee like morale compass, and like it is kind of true what they say. People don't leave companies, they leave their managers, and
Yep.
you're in such a bad like I would say that like restaurants in particular or franchises that kind of those kinds of businesses are in a much more difficult battle for talent than I would say like other sort of industries because there are so many different niches like vacuuming talent like not only are you competing against other restaurant groups you're competing against other types of business and hospitality but then you're also not just competing against hospitality, you're competing against retail, but you're also competing against Uber Eats and DoorDash. And then you're also competing with like, I know I feel like I'm like really like dumping all these on you. But like also competing like
No, no.
and there's so many. I mean, they're like it's like and it's a fierce battle for talent. And so one of the things I've heard from doing this podcast series is that like what's kind of happened post COVID is the good managers that were there, say up to and during COVID, the ones that have left have not come back because they found kind of new careers elsewhere. And there has been like I would say like a generation of people that haven't quite graduated into becoming good managers post COVID. So consequently there's like a lack of good managers out there to like run lots and lots of restaurants, like where there's such a dire need for that. Do you see that as well?
Some some
Yeah,
maybe I've been fortunate enough that um hiring at the entry level is probably harder than it is at the restaurant level and the area level, and then above that, there's still a decent amount of people that are looking. If COVID did anything, it took people like me who loved what they did and made them think, well, what about the time when my boss didn't do this and didn't do that? So if you give somebody a compelling reason, like, oh, I should work here because I'm going to get treated something about it that's different. You have to have something
yeah,
compelling to get people there. Because you're right, we're competing with the Amazon factories, working at home. It took a whole segment out. But
yeah,
um, what's interesting though is the same principles rarely haven't changed on if you had a location that was tough to hire before COVID, um, and it's still tough to hire, and you had the same manager, more than likely, it's probably something to do with the culture of the environment. I've never seen so many times in my career where you've been told, "Oh, you don't want this restaurant. It's horrible. You can't staff here. It's the wrong part of town." Well, once you once you find the magic peg, the right person to
yeah,
fill that spot that fits with the community, that's gonna um, do that, it suddenly just it goes away because then they take on that and they attract people. I don't know how many times I've seen that where we've had to change that out, and it also is forced you to be a little bit more of used to. You would take a little bit longer and make sure everything was 100%. If I wait for somebody now to be 100% ready, they're never going to be ready. You have to be able to accept that they're 90 or 80% there, and what's going to get them the rest of the way is by doing and learning and mentoring. So I think there has been a shift with some younger managers that are just as every bit as good as what was there before. They just need someone to take a chance on them, and you
yeah.
gotta mentor them, and those folks attract other people like them. So it's really, I think it's a universal thing. I mean, you get a lot of what you are. You mirror that out. I mean, I think it starts with being involved. Like if I'm not involved at and people don't know who I am, then it doesn't trickle down. So, um, but I think
Totally.
you see it, you see it everywhere. You really do. Like, if I think back before CD stores were obsolete, right? If you're going to a CD store, the staff a lot of times looked like they were going to load up the equipment for Motley Crue.
Face to face.
So you expected that, and it fit that environment. And you're like, if I want to learn something about some weird band the drummer of Motley Crue's in, I bet this guy can help me. So there's some of that I think in there as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm thinking about it now, like in the sense that, like, you know, the kind of key things that you look for when you want to hire for or promote that kind of like talent to like more responsibility. And then you talk a lot about like they don't have to be. I'm not looking for them to be 100% ready because they're not going to be, and you
Mhm.
want to put their feet to the fire. What are the kind of key things you look for in sort of those workers that you think have the potential to manage a restaurant for you?
Um, well, it's never about um, the technical skills. Like someone doesn't have to be able to be a whiz with math or be a whiz with something that you can teach them. I'm looking for people that have traits that I can't teach. Are you honest? Do you care about what you do? Do you care about yourself? Do you have some kind of drive that makes you get out of bed besides you just want a dollar? People that have drive and motivation, and it comes in all different forms. And you got to be willing to kind of scrape the surface away and see that, because you can't
Yeah.
teach that stuff. You've never been able to. So you look for that. And then, I mean, whether it's making tacos, frying fish, or booking someone into a hotel, you can teach anybody how to do that. I mean, I can teach my grandmother that's 97 how to ring up a taco, but you can't teach somebody to be friendly. You're either friendly or you're not friendly. You're either going after stuff and a go-getter, or you're not. So I look for those kind of things. I think you're constantly talent scouting for that person that's just there as a cashier or cooking fish, and you're like, you know what, they've asked questions, they're showing some interest, they've got some pride. What else can we do with them? And a lot of times it starts by, hey, have you ever thought about doing more? And then that simple
Yeah.
question leads to the next question, and it goes from there.
And I guess on that, because we kind of veered into a sort of quasi retention sort of conversation now, it's like, how do you keep these kinds of, like, do I call them diamonds in the rough? I mean, it sounds to me like you've got plenty of diamonds here, so I probably shouldn't call it that. But tell me, like, you
Uh,
know, how do you think about keeping the staff that you already have? Like, are there like processes or like programs you have in place, or is it like nuanced, like how you talk about promoting them? Like you look for like they're kind of, it's almost like a vibe check. It's like hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. Like being friendly, for example, they've got a certain something. Can they be a team player? Like, how do you think about like the retention side of things so you don't like churn over lots and lots of different employees?
the retention side, especially at that hourly level, is difficult. And even with that right manager, you're still gonna have some of that. I think now even more so, it's making sure that you're flexible. In the past, you kind of had people that look for you to say, no, you're going to work this. This is what I need from you. And now people want someone that's going to be okay with, I only want to work this. So then you're building a restaurant or a staff around people's needs. When you give them what they want, then they stay.
Yeah.
If I got somebody that wants to work 4 days a week, and these are the 4 days because the rest of the time they're doing whatever it is they're doing in life, and you meet that need, that sometimes that ends up being worth more than an extra 50 cents or a dollar. Usually that money piece is second or third down on the list if you meet their needs and you have some flexibility. And
Interesting.
the restaurant industry wasn't known for flexibility when I was growing up in it. You didn't show up late once and expect to have a job, or
Yeah.
there was no debating like, you're going to be running this drive-through, John, every Friday. I'm not worried about your dating agenda or your skateboard habit. You're going to be there, and you didn't question. I'm like, oh, that's what my manager said. I'm going to do it. But now the environment's shifted. People want flexibility. They also want to know that if they want something more, they're valued, even if they don't want to move up. They just want to have a piece in it.
Yeah.
They want people to ask them, what do you think? Why do you think this is bad? And then you've got to be willing to hear it and listen to what they have to say. I think that's changed a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear that a lot from like, peers of yours like that, especially as like sort of quote unquote Gen Z have kind of come into the workplace post COVID as well, where they kind of didn't have that sort of employment, that there was like gap in employment because of COVID. That I hear people say like things like, they see things in the way that things are done and they speak out about them because they don't really know any better. And so like things kind of get changed now, like modes of communication. Like how do you think about communicating to your younger staff? You know, is it like email or like board on the wall? Do they pay attention to that kind of stuff versus like, you know, back in the day, very until very recently, having your phone on the floor was like a mortal sin. And now it's like I was talking to somebody, they were saying actually no, like we allow them have their phones because it's an easier way for us to communicate with the staff, you know. So it's like interesting how
Right, right.
times changing, you know. I'm curious your take on that with the Gen Z.
Um, the the great thing about Gen Z they're much more tech savvy, and they're more interested in dealing with things that are technical. But I feel like we do them a disservice a little bit because there's so many services out there that want to sell you this great new social platform for them that trying to mimic what they're used to, and you sign them up for it, and they realize real quick that it was made by somebody that's not from Gen Z, and they have no interest in using a bad service to communicate.
Yeah,
But um, if you, I mean, we've moved around to various vendors trying to find something that'll work for Gen Z, and scale back to Gen X, and in some
yeah,
cases further back. But I think they've embraced. They really want to be able to communicate um, in less traditional ways. They're not
yeah,
interested in getting an email from you. They're not as much interested in about reading uh, as much stuff on bulletin boards, but they will read a text message.
yeah,
Um, if I mean, I would say until COVID, I don't know that I had any people that ever interviewed people via FaceTime and
yeah,
video messaging at the hourly level, but we do that. I mean, we do that all the time. COVID taught us too that if I want to FaceTime into a restaurant manager and help them celebrate somebody's birthday, that Gen Z people are like, "Oh, John took the time to FaceTime us," so they like that stuff. So we use a communication service for that, but you, you're not trying to dress it up like being the TikTok or Instagram replacement, because they don't want that. They just want something that's accessible, easy for them to do, and and that you're going to respond back to them. And I think that's the other pitfall of those technologies is whatever message platform you use, whether it's Teams or the Crew app or any of those, when that stuff invites interaction and then you don't take advantage of that moment, you've lost that person, because then they
totally.
don't think you care, because they're
Yeah,
looking for an instant response. They're used to that. They're like, they text one of their friends about something important, they're responding.
yeah,
So if their boss isn't getting back to them in a reasonable amount of time, but, I think the Gen Z thing, the misconception that they can't be professional and have something to offer is just it's not true.
yeah,
I probably have more Gen Z restaurant managers now than I ever did. These are young managers that have a lot to offer. You just got to give them that chance.